遠足の写真を私に待たせてください。
Wait, so this is gonna be a Kaori episode. Okay, let me just get a little ready. Okay, go. Cold opener featured the aforementioned Shrills crying out over how she didn't have a photo of herself. Good start. The episode proper opened with our protagonists discussing their upcoming field trip. In particular, Doremi, in spite of what the subtitles say, was asking if bananas count as snacks, which is said to be a common question kids ask, as they're usually only allowed to take a mere 300 yen worth of snacks on their trips. Personally, I wouldn't ask, as I've never been a big fan of bananas myself. Though I will ask, does this count as a snack, or something else altogether? They also took time to volunteer roles for the trip, and of course, you know who took the role of photographer. With that, Doremi made sure that she'd be ready for the trip the next day, even double, tripling, quadruple checking her bag. Of course, doing such ate into her sleep time, not that it really mattered to her. Okay, am I the only one kinda freaked out by the layout of the scene? Unsurprisingly, in one of the funnier bits of the episode, she overslept and almost missed the bus. Though personally, I would have called it sick if I knew this character was gonna take the spotlight for this episode. And Kaori quickly made her presence known when she started taking pictures of Ompu. I mean, sure, taking pictures of her singing a really good insert song on the bus made sense, but then she took a pic of her almost falling over.
音符ちゃんの写真なら高く売れるかも。冗談よ、冗談。
You say that, and yet we all know you watched this last season. And if that didn't already make her kind of unlikable, she then took pics of Hazuki, who was suffering from motion sickness.
こういうハプニングが後々いい思い出になるものなのよ。
Yeah, because taking compromising pictures of someone totally worked out great for the characters of this movie. Really, the only saving grace of this scene, and really the whole episode, was Reika photobombing almost every picture she took. It was especially funny when you consider the meme wouldn't really become a thing until 2009, making our resident rich girl quite the pioneer. Anyway, they made their way to what I'm guessing is a modern art exhibit where, oh god.
気が甘い。あなた本当のカメラマン？ピントはちゃんと合ってるんでしょうね。
Let's see here. An obnoxious voice, butting into other people's business, and trying to talk to someone who manages affairs. There's a word for this kind of person, but I can't quite put my finger on it. And, unfortunately, her antics only continued as she kept taking candid pictures of her classmates. That was a bad enough invasion of their privacy, but she also almost took a pic of Doremi using magic, again, and I guess it's only appropriate that she kind of looks like a titan from this angle. Fortunately, she was more focused on the Stooges, allowing Doremi to quickly change back.
危なかった。
Oh, come on. Y'all are overreacting. I mean, what? Do you have a little PTSD from the last time she almost busted you, which resulted in the near death of Ompu? Oh. But yeah, it almost feels like they really should be taking this a little more serial after a season-ending experience like that. It would be a very effective callback, to say the least. Then again, these characters also seem to have long-term memory problems, as Doremi had forgotten that Kanai already said that her family doesn't commonly eat steak just because they own a steakhouse. I think an admittedly minor issue I have with this episode was how it seemed to prioritize comedy over its continuity, which I guess makes sense considering this was a Yoshimi Narita episode. I mean, don't get me wrong, I usually love her work, but I also think sometimes she puts a little too much emphasis on her comedy and doesn't think all of her stories through as a result. Case in point, Kaori kept on taking candid photos, including when Aiko was just trying to eat, and yet she took a pic of her esophagus. Alright, so with a character like this, a good lesson that could be taught is the importance of respecting other people's personal space. Throughout this episode, Kaori is not only taking compromising pictures of her classmates, but she's also been a total smartass who acts like she knows what the concept of good photography is. all the while ignoring how she's clearly bothering everyone and making them uncomfortable, which to me doesn't sound like a good memory. Guess what lesson they don't teach in this one? I mean, at first, Aiko kind of brings it up, but then it somehow trailed off into platitudes about how pictures are taken with the heart and how Kaori had to take a picture of herself.
What the hell does this have to do with anything?
I mean, if they want to teach a lesson about recognizing your own self-worth, that's not a bad lesson in of itself, but that subject matter hasn't been really brought up in this episode, unless you count the cold opener, which shouldn't be your only setup for why we should feel bad for Kaori, in spite of her jerk-ass behavior throughout this episode. And that's the sound of the Aesop crumbling under its own weight. As a result, it is difficult to get into the final act of this episode, as they failed to give Kaori's conflict here any sort of legs, and thus they had to pile on with the sympathetic moments for her when she really hasn't earned them after disturbing everyone as much as she has. Just using some kind old people to forcibly hammer home your message isn't going to work. Anyway, Kotaki and Kimura tried to kind of rightfully confiscate Kaori's film. Sure, they were being too aggressive, but again, I ask, whose fault is it that those pictures were taken without their permission? The film ended up falling into a nearby river, and y'all really should be thanking me that I'm not playing any audio here. My ears are still bleeding. Anyway, the Ojamajo of course decided to try and save the film and cast the magical stage. Why does this remind me of something?
You may find yourself running.
Stop there, Nimoy! They found it, and I guess used their magic to fix the water damage, which I'm not even sure if alchemy can fix something as intricate as film, but whatever. They returned the film to Kaori, and I will at least give a little credit to this one line from Hazuki about how it is important to sometimes change your perspective when doing certain jobs. In the case of a photographer, it is important to consider the side of a person having their picture taken in order to at least get some proper composition. It is also important to respect the person's personal space, but I think we're far past the point of that being relevant in this episode. Anyway, the elderly couple from earlier of course took a group picture with Ojamajo and Kaori, with the best girl of this episode, Reika, photobombing yet again. And the episode ended with everyone praising Kaori's photos in spite of everything, but then again, most of them did have Reika photobombing them, so I guess it was somewhat justified. Okay, so putting aside how I really don't care for Kaori's voice, this just wasn't that good of an episode. They failed to capitalize on the events in the previous season that at least would have been kind of interesting to bring up, and worst of all, they just didn't have that much of a strong message or overarching theme. When the best part of your episode is a bit of an outdated meme, you really should just burn this film. I will admit, some of my major gripes with this episode more likely come from a more modern perspective. After all, we do live in a social media age where privacy is a near luxury at times. That said, even if consent is a little more emphasized today, respecting other people's personal space has always been a thing. Thus, when more than half of the episode just features the spotlight character taking embarrassing candid photos of everyone, it's hard to feel bad for Kaori during the final act when her losing her film was more of a consequence of her own disrespectful behavior. Not helping matters was how kind of out of nowhere this message about Kaori joining in on making some good memories was really only brought up during the final act. On top of it all, this could have been a basis for a good callback to the events that concluded the previous season, and yet it was mostly just used as a one-off joke. Thus, the only thing that was kind of engaging was Reika's photobombing. That was legit pretty hilarious, and proof that Yoshimi Narita wrote this episode. However, with a fairly unlikable spotlight character and a weak message, this is overall a pretty below average episode. They say a picture says 1,000 words, and yet this one probably could barely fill a paragraph. With the announcement that Precure All-Stars Resurrection of F is going to have some select members across the franchise featured in the film, I figured that we may as well also select another doujinshi to review. Yeah, we really need a scriptwriter. But yeah, with the upcoming film looking pretty good so far, we figured we'd take a look at Fun Precure Dojishi, where they once again encounter an incarnation of the Destroyer of Worlds. We also might take a look at some other books too. Believe me, we've got some good ones waiting. So look forward to it. And until then though, for now my friends,
Think of it this way.
oh,
You can do
been
almost
signed to go feed
anything
him.
on the internet. Work, shop, chat.